Hello and welcome to this Friday episode of Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. A lot to get to today. We're going to talk about Seattle's latest efforts to hire more police officers after losing hundreds of them, in part due to the political climate. Also, up until this point, I haven't been talking about this awful story of a 10-year-old rape victim in Ohio who had to travel to another state to get an abortion. I'll tell you why I've held off talking about it until now, and also it continues to evolve, so we'll discuss the latest what we know about what has really become a flashpoint in the abortion debate. Plus, we're going to have an update to Starbucks closing some locations across the country in liberal cities over crime. Plus, I finally know why I wound up in Facebook jail, so I'll talk about that. Also, we're obviously going to have Fridays with Friends and Florida Report, all of it and more coming up. But let's start in the city of Seattle. In case you're not aware, Seattle is in a challenging place when it comes to public safety. The city has lost around 450 officers since 2019. A lot of them in 2020 during all the height of unrest. We had the Chaz Chop situation. There was this renewed debate around policing in this country. The force is now down to 950 deployable officers. To put that in perspective, that is the lowest level since 1991. The lowest level since 1991. So the city's new mayor, Bruce Harrell, who has said that he's supportive of growing the size of the police force, despite, city council members who, pledged to defund, and some of them have been slower to come away from that pledge. So Mayor Bruce Harrell is unveiling this plan that he believes will help them hire 500 new officers in the next 5 years.
Many of these officers are working double shifts. They are being disrespected. And they are dealing with issues even in their own lives on their day-to-day jobs that I'm concerned with as mayor. When I talk about One Seattle, that's what we talk about, looking at the whole ecosystem of public safety, talking to the officers themselves, and having the right funding strategy. And I think that's what this plan presents. Financial incentives are critical. That's why this plan offers incentives up to $30,000 for lateral transfers and $7,500 for new recruits, ensuring that Seattle is fully competitive with our neighboring jurisdictions. Now, having said that, these numbers were not arbitrary or random, that we do a national search, we look at a regional approach in our different neighboring jurisdictions, and we have to compete. Let me make that point very clear, that officers have options.
So look, some of these things are no-brainers, right? When you talk about hiring bonuses for new recruits and for lateral transfers from other agencies, you have other agencies who are offering bonuses. And so you have to get to a level where you can compete with that. And then focusing on retaining the officers you already have and trying to make it more advantageous for them in terms of pay and vacation, et cetera, for them to stay. I mean, these things are no-brainers. Now, whether the police department can achieve hiring 500 new officers in 5 years, I think is really up in the air. I don't know if that's a realistic goal, because you're losing officers at a rate that's much faster and much higher than you're able to replenish them. For instance, the interim police chief, Adrian Diaz, just gave an example. So far, since the beginning of 2022, 109 officers have separated from the Seattle Police Department, and they've only managed to hire 35. So if you hire 35 officers, great, but when you're losing 109 over the same period of time, that puts you in a situation that's really not manageable. And of course, there are some activists who are like, we shouldn't be spending more money on trying to hire more officers. There's some Seattle City Council members, like the public safety chair, Lisa Herbold, who says, look, we need to look past hiring and try to make officers responsible for fewer things. So they want to continue to invest in alternatives to policing, which, look, I'm fine with alternatives to policing. I don't think police should have to waste time being the ones who respond to homeless camps, the ones who respond to 10,000 plus calls of people in a mental health crisis every year. There's no officers who want to do that work anyway. But right now, the system isn't designed for anyone else to do it. So you keep talking about alternatives to policing, sending other people to non-urgent or non-emergency or non-dangerous 911 calls, whatever a non-dangerous 911 call is. You keep talking about those things, but you haven't really taken any concrete steps towards making that a reality. So in the meantime, yes, we do need police officers to be responding to these things. I mean, gosh, you have city council members that continue to live in this complete la land, this absolute like utopia they have built in their mind about what they want the world to be, the utopia that just doesn't exist right now. So anyway, I will say I wish Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell all the best. I think he's been saying the right things. He's been focusing on the right things. It's a wonderful change from where we were a couple years ago. He has more support than the previous mayor had to do some of these things. But I think we're missing the bigger picture here. The bigger picture isn't about just one city. Yes, Seattle has become this sort of poster child for a city that has not treated its police officers very well, across the country. And I think if you're a police officer anywhere else in the country, why would you come to Seattle? I just don't know who would be jumping at an opportunity to come here, bonuses or incentives aside. That's going to be very, very difficult just because Seattle has this terrible reputation among law enforcement. But the bigger picture here is that you don't have to just convince an officer to come work for your agency. You have to convince that officer that this is a good place to come and live for their family, for their significant others, for their kids. So it's not just about a city. It's about the political environment that this state has fostered. We have a very anti-police sentiment at the highest levels of government in Washington state. You have a governor in Jay Inslee who has been explicitly told on multiple occasions that he is not welcome at the funerals of fallen police officers. You have Democrats in the state legislature who have passed bills that not only make it more difficult for police to do their jobs, but more dangerous for police to do their jobs, making it almost impossible for police to pursue suspects, limiting the type of force that police officers can use and when they can use that force. So if you're the family of a police officer who thinks, well, Seattle's offering some really good incentives, does that balance things out? There is no incentive you can offer a police officer that is worth their life. Let me repeat that for politicians who don't understand that. There is no incentive that you can offer a police officer that is more important than their life. And in the same vein, there's no incentive, no financial, monetary incentive you can offer a police officer that officer's family would prioritize above their safety. So Seattle can have this, what I think is a slow change of heart in leadership, and you can offer all these things at a city level to try to get officers to come here. But the truth is that we continue to live in a state that is not welcoming and not appreciative of law enforcement. When you have Democrats who are making laws that, again, make it more dangerous for police to do their jobs, when you have a governor who still has not spoken out about the public safety crisis that we're in. This is a governor who said during the Chaz Chop debacle, when 6 square blocks in the city of Seattle were taken over by rioters, that he didn't know anything about it, that he hadn't heard of it. Of course, he changed his tune and said, oh, yeah, I knew all about it, a couple of months later when he was running to keep his job. And so it's not about just getting police officers to come to Seattle for some monetary incentives. It is about making Seattle, making the surrounding areas, making the state a place that is welcoming and appreciative when it comes to the really difficult jobs that police officers do every single day, and convincing their families that, yes, this is going to be a supportive community, not only for your loved one who puts on the uniform, but for you as well. And I've always said that I am always going to support good officers. There's, of course, a limit to that support. I mean, you look at Uvalde, Texas. We should all have limits to, under the circumstances that we're willing to support people who put on the uniform and protect and serve. We're not talking about supporting bad cops. We're not talking about supporting rogue cops. But where we're at right now is not an environment that is conducive to having good officers come here and want to protect and serve. It's just not. So again, I admire Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell for trying to change course on this, trying to bring more officers in the door. I think it's going to be a very difficult job, 500 officers in 5 years. I mean, that sounds nearly impossible to me, especially without a greater shift in the state. So I really hope that leaders at all levels will look at what's happening in Seattle and realize that even if they're a politician who doesn't represent Seattle directly, they do have a direct responsibility to help change the climate around policing. By now, I'm sure all of you have heard the story of a 10-year-old in Ohio who was raped, found herself pregnant, and had to travel across state lines to get an abortion. It's something that President Biden used sort of in this renewed debate around abortion rights in this country.
Just last week, it was reported that a 10-year-old girl was a rape victim in Ohio. 10 years old. And she was forced to have to travel out of the state to Indiana to seek to terminate the presidency and maybe save her life. That's last part is my judgment. 10 years old. 10 years old.
Now, I had hesitated up to this point to talk about it because there were a lot of questions about whether the story was even true. For instance, if you had a 10-year-old who was raped, had there been an arrest made in the case? At that point, there hadn't been. And it was really a story that was coming from one person. And so it's almost sounded like it was too in line, like the timing of it was just too in line with the debate around Roe v. Wade, the president using it as a talking point. And for that reason, I was incredibly skeptical of the story. And now you have an update that's come out that, in fact, an undocumented immigrant from Guatemala was arrested for repeatedly raping a 10-year-old girl in Ohio. A man by the name of Gerson Fuentes was the one who was arrested. And so that seemed to be kind of a verification of this story that had been told about this 10-year-old, which is, I mean, an absolute tragedy and just horrifying what happened to this little girl. And so you've got this guy who is under arrest for it, absolutely seems to, and he's 27 years old, illegal immigrant, seems to verify that this did indeed happen. Well, here's where things get a little strange. Telemundo sends a reporter to the last known address of the victim in this case and her mother. So I'm going to play you the video in a second. Telemundo knocks on the door, and the mom agrees to talk to them just through this tiny slit in the door. And listen to what she says.
¿La niña vivía aquí también?
Sí, pero ella está bien. Todo lo que están diciendo en contra de él es mentira.
So let me translate that for people who are listening on podcast who can't see the subtitles. The mother telling Telemundo that her daughter is fine, quote, is fine, and everything that they're saying about the suspect is a lie. So you have the mother of this 10-year-old basically saying that this 27-year-old, Gerson Fuentes, did not do what he's being accused of doing. To add another wrinkle to this, the doctor who performed the abortion, Dr. Caitlin Bernard, she had to do an official filing with the Indiana Department of Health, and she listed the age of the alleged rapist as 17 years old. As 17 years old. And Fuentes is 27 years old. And so you've got the mother saying, well, what they're saying about Fuentes is a lie. And then on the official report, it says the rapist was 17. So is this the wrong guy? Do they have the wrong person? So again, we'll continue to track this, but I had hesitated talking about the story at all until there was someone other than one person vouching for the validity of this story. And now it seems like there is, but there's still a lot of confusion about what exactly happened here. But it's going to continue, I think, to be at the center of the abortion conversation for a while. But I hope we can all just be just together on the fact that this is horrifying for this 10-year-old girl, and especially horrifying considering her ordeal has now become this national point of conversation. I mean, I cannot even imagine what that little girl is going through and will be going through for some time. All right, we talked on the subscriber-only show on Wednesday about the fact that Starbucks is closing 16 stores across the country due to concerns over crime. The locations that those stores in, Starbucks says, are not safe, and that workers have complained that they're not safe. So Howard Schultz had this meeting where he was talking to employees, and someone recorded him on camera what he was saying about this. And my friend Ari Hoffman, who hosts the Ari Hoffman Show over on KVI Radio in Seattle, he got a hold of this recording. Here's what Howard Schultz had to say.
I don't have to spend too much time on what's going on in the country and how America has become unsafe. But you all read the press release of the last couple of days about the fact that we are beginning to close stores that are not unprofitable. But we're closing stores as a result of the co-creation sessions that we've had. Almost 60 now, 25 in the SSC and the rest in the field. We had one yesterday in San Antonio. But in all of those sessions, it has shocked me that one of the primary concerns that our retail partners have is their own personal safety. And then we heard the stories that go along with it about what happens in our bathrooms. The issue of mental illness, the issues of homelessness, and the issues of crime. And Starbucks is a window into America. We have stores in every community, and we are facing things in which the stores were not built for. And so we're listening to our people and closing stores, and this is just the beginning. There are going to be many more.
Now, Schultz also went on to directly criticize government officials in some of these cities like Seattle and Portland and Los Angeles, where they're forced to close these stores.
In my view, at the local, state, and federal level, these governments across the country and leaders, mayors and governors and city councils, have abdicated their responsibility in fighting crime and addressing mental illness. And we are going to have to refine and transform and modernize many of the things we do to meet the needs of our customers in a very changing operating environment in which customer behavior is changing. Now, I say that, but at the same time, you need to understand something. Despite the challenges of COVID and post-COVID, and the changes in customer behavior in which over 50% of the business is drive-through, over 25% of the business is mobile order and pay, and the third place experience as it was designed seems to be less relevant, the demand for Starbucks coffee by our customers, domestically and around the world, has never been greater.
Again, those videos were obtained by Ari Hoffman, who's a host on Talk Radio 570 KVI in Seattle. You can hear him weekdays from 3 to 6 p.m. So we appreciate him letting us use those videos. You know, I will say about Howard Schultz, this isn't the first time he's brought up concerns like this. Do you remember when he was maybe going to run for president? I sat down with Howard Schultz for an interview at the time, and he was talking about the need to deal with homelessness, the need to deal with mental health issues. Of course, he didn't wind up running for president, but it was something he was addressing at the time as a potential concern. Now, there's kind of another wrinkle in this. There are some Starbucks employees who are crying foul here, who believe that closing these 16 stores is really just a way to punish some of the stores who have voted to unionize. So of the 16 stores that are being closed, 2 of them are newly created union shops. The 2 of them that are union shops are actually in Seattle. And so you have some of these employees who are saying, oh, this is some like convoluted way to union bust and to get rid of these stores or to send a message. Now, there are at least 9 stores in Seattle that are either unionized or are on the verge of unionizing, and only 2 of them are being closed. And so I find this excuse kind of hard to believe. And to further that, the 2 union shops that are being closed in Seattle are indisputably, I mean, it cannot be argued that they are in areas of high crime. I have been to both of these stores. Neither of these stores are in particularly pleasant locations in the city. And so you have 16 stores across the country being closed. 2 of them happen to be union shops. And so you have folks saying, oh, this is an elaborate attempt at union busting. I just don't buy that. In fact, I think there are more locations in Seattle that you could make a good argument that they should be closed for crime reasons because they're simply not safe. And as I said on the show on Wednesday, this isn't going to make or break Starbucks. It's not going to make or break any of the cities. There is a coffee shop on every corner in Seattle. Like, we'll do fine without these additional Starbucks locations. But when you talk about particularly one of the locations that's closing downtown, these are areas that are really struggling to reactivate post-pandemic. And so when you take out something like a coffee shop, which is a gathering place, you take out a really important fabric of that environment, of that neighborhood, of that block. And so you just continue to unravel anything even resembling safety and security and vibrancy and life in that neighborhood. And so I think that these Starbucks locations pulling up shop is going to lead to more businesses pulling up shop in areas of the city that are already really, really struggling to bounce back after the pandemic. So in that sense, it's not just about Starbucks. It is about whether the city can fully come back to life. And this is a sign that we are still going in the wrong direction. As you know, earlier this week, I wound up for the first time in Facebook jail. And I talked about why I was really troubled by this, the fact that this is really my livelihood. And if one day Facebook just snatches it away, like, what am I going to do? I was actually, like I said, very ticked off by it. And to make matters worse, I wasn't being told why I was in Facebook doghouse for 24 hours. I couldn't post or respond to posts or anything like that. And so that was frustrating. It's like, you're saying I did something wrong so bad that you are taking away my ability to reach an audience of 173,000 people, but you're not telling me what it was. And so I was sort of complaining about this very publicly on social media, my other social media channels. And I had a few people from Facebook reach out. And then ultimately, Facebook had a human being look at this. Because remember, a lot of these decisions, I would argue most of these decisions, are made by, like a little algorithm that detects things and then says, oh, you engaged in this. And so I eventually ended up just seeing a notification pop up that I had engaged in hate speech, that I had shared hate speech. But again, it wasn't saying the post. And so I'm thinking to myself, I have never engaged in hate speech in my entire life. It's completely antithetical to everything that I'm about. And so then I was even more curious, and I was just feverishly trying to get a hold of someone on Facebook. And then I had learned that Facebook was having a human being look at this, and they actually apologized. I got an apology from Facebook, and I feel very, very good about that. I don't know how many people Facebook apologizes to. So I got this note saying after a review, they found out that my post absolutely did not violate their community standards around hate speech, and that all of my page function had been restored. So I also found out what the post in question was. Do you want to know what it was? Well, here it is. It's an interview I did with a dad in Snohomish, Washington, who said he was subjected to vicious online attacks after complaining about a law in Washington state that lets kids over 13 make medical decisions without their parents' consent. Eli Holt was his name, and he was really mad because his child got prescribed antidepressants at school without him knowing about it. So he had posted a video online. It got picked up by libs of TikTok. And after it got picked up, he says that he was subjected to just attacks left and right, calling him a bad parent. And one called him, I'll let him say it,
that I am a fat, faggot Trump supporter.
So I put those words in a quote on my post, F-word Trump supporter, and then attributed them to this dad. And so in one sense, I can understand how a Facebook algorithm would see that and say that's hate speech. But you can see how when a human being looks at it, they understand that it's actually in defense of this dad who was subjected to hate speech. It was a quote of what somebody said to him that he was relaying. I mean, it's a story with news value. So when I found out it was that post, I was like, well, gosh, I guess that's understandable. But had I not, had the platform that I do and been, verified across other social media platforms, I'm not sure I would have had a human being look at this at Facebook. And so in that sense, I got a little bit of special treatment here. So I imagine that stuff like this happens to people all the time, where their account gets disabled for some period of time and they have really no recourse. They might say, well, that doesn't count, and they could challenge it. But then, no human being is going to ever look at it because Facebook is massive and you've got millions and millions and millions of people who use it. So in one sense, I'm glad that they have an algorithm that looks out for language like that. But on the other hand, you took away my livelihood for 24 hours based on what is clearly a faulty algorithm. So anyway, I just wanted to update you guys on that. My record has been wiped clean. I've been vindicated, as I knew I would be. I knew that I was innocent. I appreciate Facebook having a human being look at this and for helping in that regard. And I guess I'll just kind of keep that in mind down the road, that I've got to be careful even when I'm quoting something, that the little Facebook bots won't pick it up and won't take my page away. But wanted to update you guys on what happened there. I also want to update you on a story I've been talking about and just beating the drum on since Monday on the podcast. Also talked about it on Wednesday on the Subscriber Only podcast. I have an issue with the fact that the Attorney General's office in Washington State is only allowing reporters to come cover press conferences if they can prove that they're fully vaxxed and boosted. I think that's ridiculous at this stage in the pandemic. I am vaccinated. I got my double dose of the vaccine, but I decided not to get a booster. I got COVID a couple months ago. I just don't see a point at this period in time of me getting a booster. And I also know, and it is true, that you can still get and give COVID if you're fully up to date on all your vaccines and your boosters. So I had reached out to the Attorney General's office on this. And as I said on Wednesday, I decided I was going to issue a formal sort of rebuke of this and just tell them I want to let you know that I don't agree with this, and here's why. I said, I feel the need to voice my objections to this policy. I don't believe at this juncture in the pandemic, and knowing the negligible effect boosters have on reducing transmission, that the requirement should supersede the right of the press to cover elected leaders in person. And I asked, is this a policy the AG's office would consider altering for the news media? I'm happy to discuss this with anyone who's open to the conversation. I heard back from a spokesperson for the AG's office saying, we appreciate your perspective. We're working to balance a number of interests, including our employees' health and safety. This is not a change that can be made unilaterally. It would require going into bargaining. This is what our employees wanted, to feel safe and reduce risks while working from the office. And it's what management wanted as well, to reduce risks to our employees. The majority of our employees support this policy, and we trust you will mention that important fact if you decide to comment on our policy. So they're saying, look, this was done in bargaining. Our employees wanted this for anyone entering the building to keep them safe while they're working. But to me, this does not change the fact that you can still get COVID from someone who has a booster. And if you're boosted, you can still get COVID. And so I just think that the possible benefit to reducing transmission from the booster at this point is pretty negligible. And I just, like I said in the email to them, don't think it should supersede the right of a free press. I think there are other things that you can do, some sort of in-depth health screening or something like that, because right now I wouldn't be able to cover a press conference at the Attorney General's office, and I'm not going to get a booster just so I can. The press conference that this was on Monday was about cold cases. It's not something that's really up my in my wheelhouse. I hadn't planned to go, but I do know there are going to be press conferences in the future that might be, much more urgent, much more serious, and that I will want to attend. So I'll keep you guys up to date on if I hear anything else, but I just really, really think that this is something that the public should know about, and it is a policy that I'm honestly a little bit horrified by at this stage in the pandemic. Speaking of the pandemic, during the course of the entire pandemic, from the very beginning, I made it a point to speak with small business owners who were being impacted by the mandates and really talk to them about how they were trying to hang on and the challenges with adhering to the mandates. Late last year, I introduced you to Jeremy Hubble, who is the owner of Go Brewing in Auburn, Washington. And he talked about the fact that they were dealing with a number of challenges. For one, they were on the border of King County and Pierce County. So King County is a little more liberal than Pierce County. And so King County had much stricter mandates. And so he was losing businesses to breweries that didn't have those mandates in place. And then also he was dealing with people who would come in and see that folks weren't wearing masks, or they didn't ask for vaccine cards, and then they'd run and tell the state on him. And so I spoke with Jeremy on unDivided, again, end of 2021, about some of the challenges that they were trying to contend with.
For somebody who's struggling, trying to run a family business, it's just one more thing that you have to deal with and try and survive.
So I've stayed in touch with Jeremy ever since and found out that there has been a pretty significant development. And so I wanted to have him on the show for our segment, Fridays with Friends. Jeremy, welcome to Fridays with Friends.
Thank you for having me, Brandi. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, and I know that this is supposed to be a fun segment, but you have some unfortunate news about the state of the brewery. Can you tell me what happened this week?
Yeah, we ended up having to close our doors on Wednesday. We had some disagreements, let's say, with the landlord, and it put us in a position where we didn't really have the opportunity to proceed. And so we just decided that this was the best way forward, is to not go forward.
And I know, and you had been kind of filling me in here and there about how things were going, and I knew they weren't going well. How much of that is attributable to the pandemic, be it mandates or just, lack of customers or what have you?
Right. Well, when you and I talked back late last year, the pandemic was definitely having a severe impact on our business. That was a really difficult time for us because, of course, winter in and of itself is not the typical beer drinking season. So you couple that with the King County mandatory mask mandates, where Pierce County was not, that was a substantial hit on our business. Through the beginning of this year, it never really fully recovered. I think when we were going into the pandemic at our former location, we were actually finally hitting our target numbers. And of course, the pandemic hits and we dropped down 80% in revenue. And we've really never been able to fully recover from that. So that's kind of been the status for the past 6 months. And obviously, at the end of the day, a business is about money. You have to have money coming in to keep the business open. And we just didn't see that revenue recover fully from the pandemic lockdowns.
And as you brought up, and for people who aren't familiar with the previous story, your brewery is really close to Pierce County, Washington, which you're in King County. So for people who aren't familiar with the state, King County, Seattle is the county seat of King County. And so you had stricter restrictions in King County where your brewery was, where just a couple miles away, there were breweries in a different county that didn't have, those strict COVID mandates. What do you think, if anything, King County could have done differently to help your business succeed?
Well, I'm always going back and forth on this in my head. And honestly, it would have just been not to do it. When you think about the state, the rest of the state really not implementing the same restrictions. When you have these outlying municipalities like Auburn, that are essentially bordering another county that doesn't have those restrictions, naturally the people, especially the people down in South King County, they are not, let's just say that they are not pro-government restrictions. And so they decided that, okay, well, we're going to go to the businesses that we don't have to put masks on. And even if you look at Enumclaw, which is technically King County, the city rallied around the businesses and put up tents and tried to keep all the CDC requirements in place, but they never restricted people by telling them that they had to wear masks. And as a result, Enumclaw has been booming ever since the result of that. And it's hard to compete with that when you have, state agents showing up at your door saying, you have customers in here without masks on. If I come back and the same thing happens, you will get fined. And so it was a very challenging time, just because of the fact that we are essentially on the county line border, but then there are other municipalities around the area that were not so restrictive.
I've read some of the comments on your guys' Facebook page, and there's a lot of people just with awesome things to say about the brewery and are just super bummed. I'm assuming that you've had the time to read some of those.
Yes, I've read them all.
For background, you came from tech, and then you had this idea to kind of launch this New Orleans style Saints brewery in Seahawks country. And the community, it sounds like, was really kind of accepting of this outsider idea.
Sure. Well, a lot of it was because it's the vibe. It's not so much about the Saints. The Saints are one thing. That's more of me. But the vibe of just giving a theme. There's so many Pacific Northwest themed breweries here in the Pacific Northwest, but it's, you know, you want to identify yourself or give yourself a little bit of character that's different to set yourself apart. So the people that we've always had, man, when we closed on Wednesday night, we had people, you know, there was like group hugs and crying and everything. And it was, sorry, it was hard. It was really hard, but it showed me that, yeah, these people are really accepting of us. And that was great. We had built a really strong community.
So why not just open the brewery in maybe an area that's a little easier to run a small business? Is that your plan? Or, I mean, what are you going to do moving forward?
I think I'm going to take a break from brewing for a little bit. I'm at a point in my life where I need to work less and make more. And it was kind of the opposite happening. So brewing beer, yeah, it sounds really fun and cool, but it is a lot of work. It's a lot of physical labor. And I've never had more bumps, bruises, scratches, bleeding, working in the brewery than in my entire life. And I just felt like, okay, this is a time to take a pause. We'll analyze where we're at as a family and then decide where we want to go from here. But the problem is that the places, like I was at a brewery on the east side last night, of course, I have time off now, I'm unemployed. I was marveling at the fact that they just opened and there was a fair amount of people in there. And it's kind of ironic that our biggest day in sales at our place in Auburn was the day we closed. And so you kind of think, okay, well, we need this kind of business somewhere else. I mean, not to make it sound like we didn't appreciate the people that visited us. I'm just saying that in this kind of business where you rely on retail sales, you need to have more consistency. Otherwise, you can't predict whether or not you're going to be able to pay your bill. So East Side, obviously the Seattle area, there's plenty of breweries already, and I don't necessarily want to deal with the hassles of downtown Seattle and that area. But I think taking a step back, it might make more sense for me to maybe get back into tech for a little bit and try and figure out maybe just brew at home at my leisure where it's not my income, and then maybe invite some friends over, some of our former original customers to come over and have a beer every now and then.
Yeah. On a broader scale, I had commiserated with you a little bit about the challenges in starting my own small business when I launched unDivided, and just how shocked I was at some of the taxes, for running what was at the time a podcast out of my house. Everything aside, pandemic, whatever it is, what are some things that you think the government could do to help small businesses succeed, to remove red tape, to just help businesses operate better?
Well, I think the bureaucracy in and of itself is the major challenge. It's a major barrier to getting any kind of assistance. I also think, honestly, Brandi, I was thinking about this last night. The local municipalities were given a fair amount of money by the federal government during the pandemic to provide relief to the local businesses. But there was no real plan for having some kind of budget available that once the restrictions were lifted, to be able to promote that the businesses were open and have these parties and have these group events. So all the money was spent, and so people didn't know what was open, where people had gone. Like we moved, we still had people asking us 2 years after we moved, "Oh, we didn't know you moved." And then it was just there could have been a lot more. I understand the intent of the relief money, but I think that had they been a little bit more forward thinking, it would have been, okay, let's take some of this money, set it aside, and then when these restrictions are lifted, we can use this to promote that businesses are back open again and to point people to whatever businesses are in town, and then events, whatnot. So that's one thing. But like I said earlier, the bureaucracy is a big challenge. And for instance, there was this restaurant relief fund that was last year, I think it was, and we applied, and we applied through the channels that were available to us, and we said we were approved, and the amount of money that we were approved for was substantial. It would have been enough to carry us for several years at our current burn rate. And then all of a sudden the application disappeared. And then we were told we have to reapply. And by the time we were told we had to reapply, the money had already been exhausted from that account.
Wow.
Yeah. And so we were left speechless. So we received our PPP money, which that was easy to do, but this restaurant relief money, for whatever reason, was it would have saved us. I mean, it at least would have allowed us to give us some more runway. And just the way things are explained to us and what you needed to provide, it was a bit of a challenge. And when you're trying to keep a business afloat and keep it running, and then you think, oh, I got this, I had an approval letter and everything, and then all of a sudden the applications disappeared. You're just kind of left holding the bag. So I think there was a lot of miscoordination. And then Congress just tried to extend that restaurant relief fund, and it was voted down. So, what do you do at that point? It's just, there's only so much you can do as a business owner to drive the business. And then people are, again, last night, people are still kind of a little freaked out about going out. I saw people walking their dogs in Bellevue last night wearing masks just outside. Yeah, I know.
Whatever they want to do, that's fine with
I
me.
know, but it's like people are still freaked out, and that's I think that might be a large contributor to the business. But as you saw with the comments on Facebook, people loved our beer. It wasn't about the beer. It wasn't about anything that we did. But I don't know if you noticed the one comment about somebody calling out Auburn and saying, okay, first this other business is closing in Auburn and now us, and they're saying, what's next? And I had somebody tell me, that they kind of jokingly told me just the other day, Auburn is where businesses go to die. And I thought that was kind of harsh, but at the same time, here we are. We were a successful business in Bellevue, and now we're closed. So again, not to call out Auburn, but I think that there's a lot more that can be done by the governments to make it easier for people to stay in business.
There was one other element of this I was interested in just giving you an opportunity to address. You alluded to it earlier. You had snitches. You had people who came into your establishment, weren't happy that you weren't abiding by, 100% of the COVID mandates, and they told the government on you. What would and this happened to many businesses during the pandemic, many small businesses just trying to stay afloat. What would your message be to people out there who did that, who snitched on small businesses who were trying to get by?
Well, you saw my response on Yelp. So I mean, that was probably not the most professional response, but the businesses, I think in general, we're trying to do right by whatever the mandates were. But sometimes when you have, like in our particular geographical location, we had to have essentially what would have been a hybrid. Your regulars, they didn't have COVID, and you have these people that come in and for whatever reason, they're on a mission to snitch on the business. And this happens throughout life. It happens in school when you're, going through school, somebody tells on another kid, and they feel better about themselves. And I don't, the stakes are much higher when you become an adult, and you have to understand that when you do those kinds of things without having an adult conversation with the business owner, you're impacting the livelihoods of families, and that is what you should be concerned about. I think as adults, you can have an intelligent conversation about, hey, I didn't get asked where was my mask or where's my vaccination card, and then deal with it right then and there. But for that particular individual, and then I saw that other thing, you did some research about the tweets that somebody wrote. What's the point? What are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to bring them into compliance, or are you just trying to feel good about yourself that you caught somebody doing something that they were not supposed to be doing? And again, what are the consequences of that to you? And that in that case, that particular individual who wrote that Yelp review, there was no consequence whatsoever. He was able to report it anonymously to the health department. And then we took the brunt. I mean, but at the same time, this is how we got to meet, was because of that whole incident. And I feel grateful for that, because your motto is, the common sense motto is, I think that's all we need to have, is just a little bit of common sense here, and just have adult conversations about, if you don't agree with something, let us know why, and we'll see how we can help you to fix it. So.
Yeah, and I'm glad that we stayed in touch and became friends. You're a subscriber, which I appreciate, and also for subscribers who've been on our monthly live Q&As, I've drank some of your booze during those. I still have a can. Maybe I'll pour one out for the homies this weekend and drink the can I have left. Let's end with this, Jeremy. Good or bad, is there one lesson you learned from trying to run a small business in Washington State during the pandemic?
Oh God, Brandi, that's a loaded question. There's one good lesson. I think I don't even think it's just for Washington State. I think always remember that you started this business for yourself, and that you should look out for yourself, because nobody else is looking out for you. They're looking out for themselves too.
I like that. I think that's a good place to end. Jeremy Hubble, will enjoy some time off maybe before you dive back into tech, okay?
I will.
So I was just really disappointed for Jeremy and for the community to hear that the brewery had to close this week after, hanging in there for most of the pandemic, just was not able to make it work. So it's a bummer. I hope he does open a brewery at some point in the future, because I've tried some of the brew he has there and it was really good. All right, switching gears a little bit. Every Friday, as you know, we check in on what's happening in the state of Florida. It is our segment, Florida Report.
It's not even controversial anymore.
People know in Florida their freedoms are going to be respected.
Here to help us check in on what's happening in the Sunshine State is our Florida correspondent, my sister Miranda. Hello.
Hello, everybody.
I laughed because last week on Florida Report, you and I were discussing this political ad that Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, ran in Florida, like trolling Florida, basically saying it's not free there, come to California, even though he still says he doesn't want to run for president. And it's like become this culture war now between Florida and California. There's this article in Fox News, Florida becoming Republican haven for, quote, liberals who have been mugged by reality, according to Dave Rubin. What do you make of this Florida-California beef? I think both are perfectly nice places to visit. I don't know that I would live in California. I would probably live in Florida.
Yeah, you're right. Both California and Florida are just beautiful places when you eliminate politics and, how much it costs to live in them. They're gorgeous, amazing places in their own individual ways. But I kind of enjoy this little beef between the two, because it just seems a little delusional in a way. I mean, I don't know if, this guy talks a little bit about how people are moving to Florida and now they're voting Republican and voting differently. I do think Florida gives people the opportunity to just see things in a completely different light, which I think automatically causes you to vote and have different opinions. But I agree with everything he kind of said. I think that what the governor of California said is a little bit uneducated about Florida, in my opinion.
Well, and if you've got people moving from California to Florida for like political reasons or something, they probably weren't uber liberals anyway. And so it's probably not a huge stretch to think that they would then vote for Republicans. I mean, there's a reason that they've chosen to move to Florida, because they went from like one beach place to another. So I don't think it was like for climate or anything like that. It had to be for some other reason.
Absolutely. And not for nothing, I don't know a single person personally that has moved from Florida to California, but I do know plenty who have moved not just out of California to Florida, but just out of California in general in the last couple of years.
And there's other factors, California is more expensive, place to live, and the gas is more expensive in California. And so I think there's a variety of reasons. There's a lot of people, for instance, who move out of Washington State. I just saw one at dinner last night, and their family's moving to Texas. And so I think there's just this quality of living, cost of living element of it that is, I don't know if it's political or not, but okay. Your first story today, we have a booming wine industry in Washington State, also California, speaking of California. And now Florida's trying to take that from us as well.
We are. So this is just another reason why everybody's moving out of California to Florida, because we're going to try to do our own wine here.
I don't think that's a reason, but go ahead.
This article out of linknews.com says Florida researchers working on breeding grapes to make Florida wine. Grapes grow best in colder climates, but researchers are breeding different types of grapes in hopes to make Florida wine. From what I understand about grapes, they grow better in cold climates. And we do not have cold climate here at any point of time in the year. But there are some grapes that are native to Florida. They don't taste very good and they're not very great for wine, but these people are trying to give them a little bit more flavor so that we can start growing our own wine here. And I think that's pretty awesome.
I don't know anything about what temperature makes better wine, so I can't fact check you on that in the moment. But I imagine Florida wine would be like crocodile blood and tears of liberals. Is it crocodiles or alligators? Which one do you have there?
We have both.
Okay.
We have both. It just depends. Freshwater is alligators. And if they're in the saltwater, they're crocodiles. And you and I, we experienced a saltwater crocodile once, so you should know the difference.
Yeah, can I tell that story quick?
Yeah, please.
And then we'll get back to the wine. Quick, this became a feud. Like, we had a full-blown sibling argument over this, and I'd like to hear from people as to who was right. So we went down to the Florida Everglades, we're at the Keys, right? We're in the Keys. And we go kayaking through these, mangrove trees. And it's a narrow opening. So if you're not familiar with mangrove trees, it's basically these trees growing out of the water. So you're in a swamp. And these mangrove trees are very tight. It's like a tunnel of trees. And you love to Instagram or whatever and get fancy pictures of yourself because you're so pretty. And there is legit an alligator.
Crocodile?
A crocodile. And we see its little head. And I'm panicking because I feel very claustrophobic. I'm in a little kayak and you're like, oh, take a picture of me. And you're posing in the mangrove trees. And I'm losing it because I'm like, we have to get out of here. I have no time for your Instagram selfies.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a debate. I kind of was, ready for the alligators. There was signs everywhere for crocodiles and alligators, but I don't think you were fully expecting to actually see one. So
yeah, no, I was really scared. I'll try Florida wine. I just feel like it's going to taste swampy, so we'll see.
Well, we do have a winery in South Miami, and I believe that they make their wine out of fermented mangoes and other fruits. I don't think they use grapes, but they do like a fermented fruit wine.
Huh. Well, if you guys get wine down, then there's really no reason to live in Washington or California. Then you've cornered the market on awesomeness. Okay, it wouldn't be a Friday Florida report without a Florida man story. What do you got for us this week?
It would not be. This week I have out of NBCnews.com, Florida man arrested after trying to flee deputies on a riding lawnmower.
Classic.
We got lawnmowers. Dusty Mobley, 40, of Holt, Florida, had avoided arrest on suspicion of stealing a boat in January by driving into a swamp, according to Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office. And apparently he drove into the swamp on his riding lawnmower. So
I imagine that lawnmower's not doing much riding anymore then. So he got away? Have they caught him since?
They caught him. Yeah, they caught him that same day. He didn't get very far. I don't think it's not an off-road ATV vehicle. So
Oh, you mean a lawnmower doesn't also work on water? Had no idea.
not yet.
Does it indicate whether he was high on anything, bath salts?
It says that he wasn't under the influence of anything except for Florida. That's his.
Under the influence of too much sun. All right, Miranda, that'll do it for this week's Florida Report. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Happy weekend.
It's not even controversial anymore.
People know in Florida their freedoms are going to be respected.
As you know, on Fridays, we also have a segment called Understanding America, where I read for you from an important text in American history. And I wanted to read part of a speech today, a little bit different. To give you a little context, it's Ronald Reagan's speech titled A Time for Choosing. He delivered it in 1964. And it actually wasn't a speech for a campaign of his. He was campaigning on behalf of Republican candidate for president Barry Goldwater, who ended up losing that election. But this speech sort of launched Ronald Reagan's political career. He went on to become the governor of California and then, of course, the president of the United States. But this was really a speech in favor of limited government. And there was one passage in particular that I found maybe pertinent to the times that we're living in right now. So cue the patriotic music, please. I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers. Not too long ago, two friends of mine were talking to a Cuban refugee, a businessman who had escaped from Castro. And in the midst of his story, one of my friends turned to the other and said, "We don't know how lucky we are." And the Cuban stopped and said, "How lucky you are. I had someplace to escape to." And in that sentence, he told us the entire story. If we lose freedom here, there is no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. This is the issue of this election. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves. All right, that's it for today's episode of Undivided. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. I will see all of you on Monday.